What my project is about is how Twitter is an unsuitable platform for influential political discourse. And that title has been molded and crafted in a very specific way because this topic covers a huge amount of things. And I was quite, when I first started this idea, I saw that there was a problem that needed researching and understanding, and it covered many different areas. So I had to refine it down to a specific area, and I wanted to cover something technical, which was Twitter. I'm going to be talking a lot about Trump and a lot of things that seem like it's not particularly relevant to Twitter, but the truth is this stuff is intertwined in how Twitter has been used for the last, mainly the last 4 years. That's pretty much what I'm talking about. Going on to the next slide. So just to start off with, I would like to talk about how Twitter grew and where it started. So it was created by a team of people that was led by a man named Jack Dorsey, who is the current CEO of Twitter now. That wasn't the case all the time. His roles have been changed quite frequently, but as it stands now, Jack Dorsey, the original founder of Twitter, is still the current CEO. So what you see on the screen here are two examples of the planning, quite comically, haphazard planning, but that they had an idea. The idea was to take advantage of the instant messaging that was currently popular right now, at the time, in around 2006 was when instant messenger was becoming really popular, but it was directly linked to mobile phones and phone numbers. They wanted to, they being the founders of Twitter, wanted to come up with a platform where you could make an announcement to everyone who has your phone number. And that, was Twitter. So they wanted the announcement to be short and sweet and concise and, not like the blogging that was becoming more popular where people were writing paragraphs and pages of information. They wanted something that was a tweet, which their initial inspiration was birds tweeting. Like a tweet from a bird is a very short, impulsive, concise piece of information from a bird to another bird, and they took that as inspiration, and that's why it's called Twitter. Okay, so development was pretty progressive in the sense that the demand for it and the utilization of it drove its development. So as more people got more involved with it, they wanted to share photographs, therefore photographs then got added, and then it went from there really. So then they introduced hashtags, and then as big events, as the word viral became more popular, a better way of describing what was going on is that events on Twitter were going viral. And ever since that happened, they wanted to take advantage of that. And that's where hashtags came from. They wanted to take advantage of things that were becoming popular culture and then allow that to proliferate even faster and therefore make Twitter more popular. Okay, so Twitter, there's a lot of technical things in Twitter that have changed a lot over the last 10 years. But there are a few things that have stood and remain either undeveloped or just implemented poorly and then not re-established. So the big one being the verification process. So, off the top of your head, verification should act as a way of identifying the abstract identity that is being presented on the internet. Being able to link that abstract identity to a real identity and make sure that that's secure. So no other person can access that identity and use that as their own. That's what verification is meant to do. That's why a passport verifies your identity, and there can't be two of the same passports, and therefore you can't have two verified identities. That is not the case on Twitter. Well, it is the case that the individual identity is associated to a real identity, and that cannot be transferred from one person to another. But the verification process is very convoluted, and it isn't as universal as it is meant to be. So my main point is that the verification process is usually only given to high-level political officials, large corporations, and influential journalists, as well as some really influential celebrities. So Lady Gaga and stuff. It's people, and the key thing is they are associated with a large corporate management service. So you have to be associated with a high-level management service to be allowed to go through the verification process. That was verification. I'm now going to talk about this really unusual thing on the right-hand side of this this slide. And Dean Browning is a GOP Republican. He was a candidate in 2016, I think. Not presidential candidate, but he was going to be placed on the GOP board in some county. I think it was Georgia. I'm not 100% sure. But this was a very viral and unusual thing that happened. He was in an argument on Twitter. He has some very strong views about immigration, as well as, very, very typical views of like quite conservative Republican views in the US. And he was having an argument with someone on Twitter, and then all of a sudden he put this tweet up. I'm not going to read it out, but started to identify with the almost polar opposite of his physical character, and decided to use that as an argument against the point that his opponent was arguing. It obviously, from first look, it looks like he's trying to use a fake account, but forgot to change and accidentally post the statement that he wanted to make on his false impersonation account on his real account, and then everyone saw that, and everyone thought that what he was doing was fraudulent and trying to deceive the public. And the reason why I've included it is not that was proven, but it's the point is that it can't be disproven. He made a lot of arguments saying that all he was trying to do was quote this individual, and there's no evidence to suggest that isn't true, but there isn't any evidence to suggest it is. The reason why I've chosen this example is that there is a fundamental flaw with identity verification. You can decide to be anonymous if you want, and with that, you can actually decide to be anyone if you want, without the verification badge. The verification badge is super exclusive, so not many people have it, and so therefore it doesn't really act as an identity verification for the main public. So that's a big point there. I also want to talk about technical implementation of accountability. So how do you hold people accountable for doing something atrocious? I'm not even talking about spreading misinformation yet. Let's say that, you say something, you threaten to blow up a government building or something on Twitter. What happens? Typically, you will have your account shut down. As long if it goes against the terms of service and what's called the rules and regulations of Twitter, chances are it'll get shut down. Twitter holds the entire right to make the decision, so there is no user moderation, unlike sites like Reddit, where the users moderate the content and moderate who can say what and when. Twitter holds those rights entirely, and chances are, they'll just delete the account. They don't even really hide posts. That's not very common. They just delete accounts left and right. But recently, when it comes to misinformation, as you can see here, and this is obviously something that has been very widely known, especially since after the 2020 election, is Twitter has started to add these tags that link to evidence that or information from more verified sources. There was a big one where there was a lot of conspiracy and claims that 5G was causing coronavirus, and that was causing a lot of various other conspiracy theories to form, and also resulted in a lot of public vandalism. A lot of 5G towers getting torn down and burnt down because of their claims that it was causing coronavirus. So they decided to add a get the facts about COVID. This was the only case that they added these links to public COVID information, claims about mask wearing and claims that mask wearing wasn't effective, claims about the vaccine. All the other conspiracies behind coronavirus didn't receive this tag. The only one that did was 5G. Just a bit interesting. I just think that, my main point is that Twitter holds those rights to force accountability. It's not always the right way of doing things, because they're not a public body. They are a social media management company, and fundamentally they're an advertising company. That's a whole different thing. But okay, next process. This is very interesting. It's quite blurry, and the reason why it's blurry is because it's actually a screen grab from a genuine Cambridge Analytica internal slide to present the process of how how they present political advertising for their like 2020, the 2016 election, as well as the Leave campaign, so Brexit. There's quite a lot of information on there. It takes a little bit of time to process. What I was going to suggest is I'm happy to send you both the presentation. You can have a look later down the road, just because I don't want to spend too much time explaining this slide. But the next one's quite interesting. This is one that I would suggest you have a good look at. This is another internal slide. This was leaked as well as the other one. And it identifies something interesting here, that Cambridge Analytica, that's a huge topic. And what they did was massive. They stole Facebook. Well, they didn't steal Facebook information data. They were given it, or they bought it. And then the rights to use it expired, but they continued using it. So that's the legal problem with what they did. Sorry, I'm assuming that you're somewhat familiar with Cambridge Analytica. But fundamentally what they did is they took Facebook user data and then they made a intensely aggressive and targeted advertising campaign for the 2016 Republican Party during the US presidential election and the Leave campaign during Brexit. What the targeted advertising did was it took Facebook data and identified key individuals who might potentially sway their vote or who are undecided. And then they would bombard them with what I would describe from my research is disinformation. The information that they were presenting wasn't verified to be true. There was no reason for it to be verified at the time because it was just advertising, and there's no real law against this conspiracy, political conspiracy. There is about false advertising about products. Like if I say that I make a fan that can cool down a room in half a second, and that's not true, then I'll be held liable for that. But that's not the case for political conspiracies. And what they did is they made political conspiracies. They targeted vulnerabilities and fears of these individuals to anger them and make them vote for a certain way based on their previous fears and resentments and things like that. I'm gonna have to keep going because I understand I'm running out of time. So yeah, and the fundamental piece of this puzzle is conspiracy. And here is the definition of conspiracy: a secret plan by a group to do something unlawful or harmful. And the key thing that stood out with this definition, especially to me and amongst all this research, is that the definition of conspiracy identifies two individuals or two parties, and that's the us and the them. And the them are doing something unlawful and doing something harmful. And what this is, in my mind, is division. And that is fundamentally what Cambridge Analytica was trying to do. They understood that if they were unable to divide the public on political opinions, they could solidify voters on one side versus the other. And if they can divide the public with a majority on their side, then they make money. It's not about political ethics or philosophical morals. It's about money. Cambridge Analytica was a business. They were a private advertising company, and they made a fortune. They made a hell of a lot of money. And it doesn't matter if they're spreading misinformation. As long as they can create that division so that their political party that they're working for wins, then quid's in. Okay, so remember the us and them narrative, because that continues throughout this entire project. This is very kind of complicated. I'm probably not going to explain it because of time, but this is it's a diagram to identify what's truth and what the antithesis of truth is, and then where we lie in terms of actually being able to present truth through human expression and culture, and why 100% truth and 100% objectivity is impossible to achieve with the limitations of human perception. It's just showing what truth is in terms of a scale. So now we start talking about there's a lot of information. I don't expect you to read all of it. But what we're going to be talking about now is Donald Trump, and he is one of the prime examples of how Twitter as a messaging platform can be used to convey not only information but a political motivation as well as a narrative. Twitter stood out at the start of when it was being developed, stood out as something that could undermine traditional media. And I don't mean by tackling them directly. I mean that Twitter could get to the people quicker than the news networks. Barack Obama, when he first won his re-election, so when he was coming and doing his second term, he announced on Twitter his second term after, it was publicly known that he had won the election. He announced on Twitter that he was continuing his second term before any of the news networks. And that post went very viral, and that was kind of a cornerstone in Twitter's development, because it identified that Twitter was a public forum that can be used to capture or perceive valuable information that's relevant to the public. So that stood out as something that was very relevant, that Twitter is something that doesn't exist anywhere else. It's a very rapid and a very efficient way of getting information from one place to a large amount of other places. So and Donald Trump knew that. Donald Trump's narrative during the 2016 election was that the fake news media wasn't reliable, is that traditional media prevented factual evidence for getting to the people, and the only way to get factual evidence was to go through Twitter and go through Trump. That was his narrative. What I'm showing you on the screen is every tweet in 2020, or most of the tweets in 2020 that of Donald Trump that use the word fraud. And that brings us on to the next thing. This is every tweet in 2020 that was made by Donald Trump, either during the election or after the election, that contained the exact statement, "I won the election," which I'm going to show you on the next slide. This diagram shows that was factually false, because these are all the lawsuits that he went ahead and pursued to overturn the election, and all 55 of the lawsuits got dismissed in some way or another. Yeah, so factually what he was saying on Twitter was objectively false to the highest degree that anyone could manage in human society. Is that the court's law is designed to identify objectivity, and when the courts say no, what you said was false, that means that what you said is likely to be false. And everything that Donald tweeted towards the end of his election saying that he won is objectively false. So yeah, he tweeted quite a lot about how he won the election, which is just unfounded and incredibly untrue. And yeah, so he was using Twitter as his platform directly to his followers to say something that the media wasn't saying, which was that he won the election. And interestingly, it resulted in a rather violent and quite pointless assault on the Capitol building. And it was a pretty atrocious display of miscommunication or misunderstanding of what reality is. These people believed that Donald Trump was still the president and that Biden hadn't won, and that there was a party, you remember the conspiracy, the us and them, that there was a group of individuals who were fraudulently manipulating the election to make Donald Trump not the president. And that narrative killed people. People died in this event. And it was, I remember watching it. It was just incredible. So I understand I have 5 seconds remaining. So I'm going to quickly move on. But yeah, I'm actually at the end of the presentation, and I wanted to just... I wanted to start talking about how Twitter held Donald Trump accountable, which obviously his account got deleted, and is what Twitter is. Did Twitter do the right thing, and are they actually holding people accountable? And then I was going to talk about solutions. But there you go. That's my presentation. There are a lot of things that I've missed, in the sense that this is such a dense topic. But yeah, so. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. Yeah, I think my timer was like 5 or 10 seconds more generous than yours.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm glad that you were keeping track of the time as well.
Yeah, it's all right.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So actually my question is, which I had written down before you got to that last slide that says solutions.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, what does this mean? So if Twitter isn't suitable for influential political discourse, then what do you like? What would you suggest then? Like, is Reddit better? Is it kind of
Well,
a platform thing, or what's the kind of where do you get that accountability? You mentioned Reddit as being a self-moderating one as opposed to Twitter being something which is obviously kind of moderated by the
yeah,
platform.
not only am I like dramatically underqualified to even remotely suggest a solution, but it's incredibly complicated. Because I would say that in a lot of cases that how political discourse functions on an official level, so Capitol Hill and the Houses of Parliament. I would say that there are problems in that case as well. The objectivity doesn't proliferate as effectively in those environments as they should. But that's my own personal opinion. So what I'm trying to say is that this is there. I think that the solution doesn't exist. Reddit is not a perfect example. It's really good for culture. So Reddit is fantastic for art and music and sports and things like that, and talking about things that don't really have a dramatic influence on many people's lives. But it doesn't always. There's many biases, and people manipulate information as much as they do on Twitter, on Reddit. It's just a lot of people's opinions, and the problem with Reddit is it's also anonymous. I think that at the core of this, there needs to be accountability, and which Twitter implemented at the last minute after the Capitol riot by deleting Trump's account. They saw that what he was doing was going against their rules and regulations, and then they held him accountable by deleting his account or suspending it permanently. In my opinion, not only was that a last-ditch effort, it was way too late, and it was kind of like hilariously subtle. Even though it was a big deal to Trump, it was very passive in the sense that they kept like nudging his posts with flags saying like, this is actually not true, this is false, up until this like quite poetically pointless crescendo of chaos, which was the Capitol riot. And they were like, okay, now we've got to stop, we've got to fix this. But all they did was suspended his account. And it's not just him. Like, Trump is just a really public example. His politics on Twitter is so convoluted and aggressive, and objectivity and fact just is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It's all just opinion after opinion, just attacking each other. So solution wise, there was a couple of things that I made that I popped into my, and that I've spoken about in my thesis, which is, number one, do we just delete Twitter? And that's quite a popular opinion. There's a lot of people who just say that Twitter has transformed from that like tweet, texting, blogging thing into this political forum that is just fundamentally not designed for politics. It's designed for opinion and impulse and just arguments and debate that just shouldn't matter. And a lot of people are just like, it's just transformed into something ugly and it should just be deleted. My point is that's just a radically oversimplified way of dealing with such a very complicated problem. And Twitter is a good thing in a lot of ways. It's really, again, the same way as Reddit, it's really good for culture. Like, people can capture and understand a lot of information on Twitter, true or not. It's a really wonderful place for communication. There's a lot of people, a lot of very influential celebrities who use it primarily, there's a lot of culture that's surrounded on Twitter that's really valuable. And I think if you delete Twitter, you just delete culture, and I think that's never the right way of dealing with a problem. I think fundamentally verification should be made into a serious thing. It's not serious on Twitter. Only really high-end celebrities and massive publications get verification. People arguing with Donald Trump or whoever on Twitter aren't verified, and I think that just removes any kind of social accountability. If you're, in the sense that people don't really misbehave as much on Facebook as they do on Reddit or Twitter, because they know that they're not anonymous. They're making their misbehaviors known to their friends and family, and as a result, that's not people behave better on Facebook. Not always, but yeah. I think that there needs to be pretty dramatic fundamental changes to Twitter for it to be a platform where people like Donald Trump and high-end, like seriously high-end political officials can use it as a form of almost official statements. So, an outsource for official statements. I say almost because there's a lot of dispute on whether a tweet constitutes an official statement from the president. In my opinion, if it goes out to the public and it's from the president, it's an official statement from the president. But like the Department of Justice says otherwise, and there's like a general in the army was given an order through Twitter. Like, I didn't include this, but there was a tweet dispute between a general in the US Army and Donald Trump, where Donald Trump was saying that this person should be reinstated in some role or another, and he was like, no, that's not how it works. I'm not going to take serious orders through Twitter. But then it's like, well, if it's from the president and it's a message about, anyway, it gets really blurry and muddy and just chaotic and casual. That's my point. But yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Break in that moment, take a breath. Thank you, myself. That was a really complete answer, I think, to the question. Just because we're kind of running out of time,
yeah.
Ask if Jenna has any questions that you.
Sorry, Jenna.
Like to say, Adrian.
Debbie, if you have more questions, I'm happy for you to ask them.
No, I think I'm okay.
Right. Yeah, it is very complex. You're absolutely right, and I think you have done, in answering as much as you can of this issue. My question is, I'm just thinking, how much of this is an issue with Twitter, and how much of this is an issue with just the task of verification itself? We are seeing some pretty horrifying revelations coming out from the BBC, right, in relation to Princess Diana. That and this is the BBC, who are supposed to be held to these gold standard, right, levels of verification and truth keeping and so on, and they are falling short of the standard, not because the BBC has no standards.
Yeah, of course.
but because of other things, right? Because verification itself, human nature itself, fraud itself is part of culture and has always been.
Absolutely. And
how much of this argument is not about Twitter at all?
This would be my answer to that, is that there are fundamental problems with how humans perceive information, and objectivity is something that cannot be fully achieved because everyone lives through a subjective universe. We perceive things subjectively as our own individuals, so information can literally mean two different things at the same time. Well, actually, everything means an infinite amount of things to everyone at different moments. Anyway, this is all metaphysics, but then so you're right that there is actually a universal problem with the process of verifying information, and Twitter is not immune to that. And there's no site, even no matter how official or how objective they try to be, it's always going to be a challenge. And I do say that this is bigger than Twitter. I think that's actually one of the biggest points that I could make through this thesis, is that it's not Twitter's not a direct. Twitter, it doesn't stop at Twitter. It goes much, much further. Just Twitter is the medium which these problems are being exhibited and being exerted onto society. These problems are proliferating society in such a way that it's causing a lot of issues. I would say, there are bigger problems. But I think in the meantime, it's like, let's sort out this while we can. Let's sort out these problems as quick as, like, little problems, just so it doesn't cause any more damage. There's no more pointless riots. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you. I guess just as a final question, like, where next? Are you going to do anything with this afterwards? Is it going to sort of inform what you do in the future?
Maybe. I've been interested in US politics for a long time, since GCSEs, and I'm not sure why. Just for something about it really draws me in, and I'm interested in technology. So personally, I'm going to take this thesis. It's going to be like locked in a box in my mind, and I'm just going to move on with my life with all this knowledge and see what changes and see how my opinion changes and what I see happen on Twitter and other social media websites. I'm also interested to see how they deal with it, what's going to happen in the future. I'm seeing a little bit more in the future. Personally, I'm finding that this is quite overwhelming. This stuff can get really, really aggressive and unfortunate, and it's actually quite difficult to see so much misinformation, so much misunderstanding, and have that like completely, you know, the Capitol riot was just so pointless. And like it makes me sad to see that people die pointlessly, or it makes me sad to see such, you know, violent things and stupid things happen so pointlessly. And I have to say that that's something that I'm actually going to move away from a little bit, just for my own personal lifestyle. I want to look at things that aren't pointless, if that makes any sense. But in the future, I might do some things. I might look at, I'm interested in culture, so I want to see how truth proliferates culture, really. That's something I do want to look into.